Here we are again, my little divas. Another May gone. You know, look at me. What am I doing shut in watching movies all day? I should go outside, converse with people, make friends, enjoy the summer while it's... Anyway, I watched the movies in May. Here we go! Targets, a 1968 film by Peter Bogdanovich. This movie's kind of a thriller and drama. It's a split down in two, confidently drawing a line between the old and the new. There's old Hollywood to new Hollywood, old horror to new horror. It's like the No Country for Old Men, America, but a little bit more movie nerd behind it. Whether this is owed to its low budget or not, the use of cold, dry violence perfectly predicts the ways cinema would reflect the age of restless violence and paranoia in the future. The image of a villain being a debauched man in a cape in a castle going to mass murderers, serial killers, unseen anonymous violence, political assassinations. Basically got it right. Basically got it all right. It's a subset in the realm of violence that I've keyed in on before. The films that I've built this sort of list on are Haneke's films. Louis Buñuel's The Phantom of Liberty had a scene that I thought was the earliest iteration of like a surreal sniper picking out people. I think it was even inspired by the same Texas shooter that Targets is. But yeah, that's like a good 5-6 years after Targets was made. And Elephant, the short film and the Gus Van Sant one. The whole film, when we're in the shooter's story, feels joyless, soulless, even through the suburban normative sheen. It's nothing but tension and suspense. Very well done, I must say. A sadistic, disconnected inner mind that wants to kill without having any reason figured out as to why. And then, Byron Korloff. And the old Hollywood backstage story is the heart and sentimentality of the film. The scenes themselves in this half move with the old snappy dialogue and a romance subplot. It's easily digestible, even schmaltzy, but you're cutting between this and the second perspective, and thus the film opens this dichotomy between time and cinema. You know there's an intersection of these two being put in motion, and you're waiting for them to crash together. Among the works that have been inspired by this, like Tarantino, that people like to make, I'd like to point out Targets as a very likely source of inspiration for a little manga called Inuyashiki, made by the guy known most for Gantz. Inuyashiki and the anime adaptation I experienced the story with was a memorable updating of a very similar concept for the internet age and in Japan, except the thing is they both suddenly acquire superpowers. Like I say, for Targets being ahead of its time, the translation seems obvious, almost too easy. We're still living in it, as haunting a thought as the final image this film leaves us with. Nosferatu in Venice, directed by Augusto Caminito and Klaus Kinski? So, stop. First thing, this has Kinski as a director credit as well. I honestly didn't even know that until making this. I can only imagine this happens because Klaus Kinski, if you don't know his way of being a human and an actor, I can only imagine he terrorizes the set and the director so much that they have to cave into a bunch of his demands before he destroys production. Also, the direction it goes with Nosferatu's sexual escapades, not as metaphorical as I'd thought. Things like that are certainly part of what you might hate about Italian films. But let's talk about what I love in Italianissimo films. They're willing to cast actors like dolls, but it either corns it up or it adds to that quality taken by surrealists. The storybook lens, reaching back to childhood eyes when magic was real and princes and princesses populated stories of accepted perfectitude. Aestheticism rules over all else, which isn't a bad take in the medium of film, after all. Donald Pleasance was in here. He has one of the funniest screen presences. I can't explain it yet. The Pleasance presence. He's always like a mad curmudgeon. He always plays authority figures who you don't buy as righteous authorities. They're more the raving, stunted kind. He blows through scenes like he's just there to raid the craft services table. This movie offers a lot of wisdom in quotes such as, "Vampires are everywhere." Again, this is shot in Venice, and that alone adds a lot to the film. It actually looks pretty great. The decayed opulence is perfect for a vampire story. You know, he's fled his castle, or the main story of Nosferatu's happened, and let's just say he somehow fucking survived. He would be on the lam somewhere, and Venice seems like the place he would suddenly be encamped. You've got the old blind woman. You have scenes with all of these troupe actors where they're fully costumed and wearing the masks. It's wacky and surreal and weird. There's even a great WTF scene where somebody's kicked in the nards, and then another woman in the group just like peels off her face, because the score is also charming. They've got to get that score. But I'd say it adds to that Italo horror vibe, especially the part where them chanting Nosferatu over and over during the climactic scene. So while we're complimenting this film, that Klaus intro scene, perfect 80s horror cinema, pure cinema. There's one lady cast to be the blonde bombshell, I'll say, whose dialogue is hilarious, with quotes like, "Said straight to people's faces in daytime. He says vampires come from bastard sons? I do not give a shit. This was my late night drinking viewing after Targets, and as a midnight horror picture, this works gangbusters. Like, it is so dreamily spooky and extra. You know, don't think too hard. Don't rate it based on its technical polish." Another thing Klaus did was refuse to cut his hair to be bald Nosferatu. So luckily, instead of getting more of the same, we have that hair, this mangy bob. There are plastic crystal balls. There's Venetian mask dancer people. There's Nosferatu's signature method of killing people, which is having them fall into a fence. Like, I'm not lying. If there was a signature weapon that you had to take away from the film, because it's the only way he repeatedly kills people, it's having them fall from a 5th-story window onto a fence. That bastard Nosferatu, he's gonna fence him again. I will say though, for Klaus, surprisingly subdued role for him. This isn't really Nosferatu getting all the screen time or theatrical performances. A lot of it's just kind of Klaus walking around or brooding, you know? He gets to be sexually aggressive. I mean, there's a sex scene at the end where you cannot hide the awkwardness, but in between those, he's kind of a sulking, silent Nosferatu. Again, seems like he barely even takes any pleasure in his life, but he's just doing it and living eternally in miserable debauchery. So Nosferatu in Venice, aka Vampire in Venice, is ultimately a metaphor for the moral gooders of the world trying to keep Kinski away from his daughters and failing. Sweet movie. Wow. I don't know if I can really like explain what's in this movie. I don't know if I can responsibly recommend this movie. I gave it a very high rating, but this isn't really like a movie that you rate. I think it's special, a memorable installment in the disturbing movie iceberg, let's say, but I kind of love that it exists. Sweet movie. Or an alternate title, Karl Marx and the Chocolate Factory. A lot of this is performance art with the camera, mixed with cinematic parts. Sometimes you're just sitting there aghast at what you're watching. This is very much in the vein of A Holy Mountain, and when I was thinking of what this reminded me of, I clocked the director of this. It immediately reminded me of the only other movie that is quite in this sex-politic performance art vein, which is W.R. Mysteries of the Organism. So this is Dusan Makavehev's thing. I'll say Sweet Movie is even more provocative, disturbing than that. You know, the film also argues for a sex-positive society and the abolishment of oppressive systems, but it drives you to the very edge of moral law. Being progressive is about being okay with anything that isn't evil, you know, as long as consenting adults want to do something and it lets some sort of freedom out of them, then it should be okay. This movie really asks you what's okay, if you can truly stomach the sweet. Watching this is, besides being hilarious, disgusting, sickening, truly challenging. I might as well put this up front, because there's the one scene that makes it genuinely polarizing. The level of reprehensible that may or may not be in this scene is the kind of thing that'll make it like a 0 out of 10. Like, if you've been loving this film, and you're saying, well, everybody involved consented to this out there auteur performance art, then there's really nothing wrong with being disgusting. But there's a scene on a boat, you know, it involves children, and it edges you as close as possible to in-camera pedophilia. I was watching this, and after seeing how unsimulated so much of the movie was, I was fucking terrified. Like, every time this woman gets really close to a child, you're just like, is this gonna become a crime? And I'll say it fits into that challenging realm that Criterion has, where they're willing to push it to, I would say, this level. Because nothing is actually done, you know, technically nothing is done to the child, to the children, but this is going on the faith of the directors that's responsible, that they have consent coaches, you know, therapy coaches that are open and telling any child actors involved that you're portraying something that is, you know, supposed to be like a evil adult getting uncomfortably inappropriate with a child. That's sort of what turns it. Like, if you just got kids and did that, like, that's sick. That certainly puts into question your ethics and morals. But if you're on a set and you have this all planned out, if you're consulting the parents, the children, about the context of the scene. Listen, this is about communism, all right? It's a symbolic scene anyway, okay? They're just talking about communism. You're supposed to be looking at it, and it represents a lot about political enticement, and okay? Whoa. But, you know, that doesn't mean that if I recommend this movie to someone, you have to stomach it. But I would disagree personally that anything they do is over the line. Basically, they would have a child actor see some skin. If kids aren't watching porn on the internet, they were finding porn in the woods. Basically, it's really not much of a tightly kept secret as you'd wish that kids will see naked bodies. This is possibly a more responsible, safe environment than porn, with all of its negative connotations towards it. But anyway, sweet movie. Again, not really rateable. It's something you experience and probably will not forget, but it just doubles down on it with more self-awareness than it might seem. They pull in and out a lot, you know, letting the absurdity or disgustingness of what they're doing be self-evident. It's got this low-budget, improvisational feeling, so not quite a masterful production like Jodorowsky, and never too clear on what political allegories or messaging is supposed to be interpreted. The death of revolution, death of freedom for a soulless product, artifice, commercialism, humans regressing to babies, food and sex, primary wants, people as consumables. There's lots of great imagery in here, laying all of these ideas out in the most ridiculous ways. It more so plays as a series of sketches, and even with two continuing plots that have nothing to do with each other literally, it kept my interest and constantly upped its morbid fascinations. So this kind of sketchy style can make a film cumbersome really quickly, but I'll say this one got away with it. It truly, in the purest sense, shocks us in order to attack the deepest ingrained pretenses we have as people grown within modern, civilized societies. It's offensive, it's stupid, it's amoral, but somehow Makavejev runs with these qualities to reward viewers who see that holding on to morals while watching these films is ultimately pointless, and it's really just funny when you get down to it. It's serious somewhere in its conception, but they're comedic works. Like, just have fun and try to judge not, lest ye be judged. If you're a fan of swans, genuinely give this a try. Try this literal shit out. Legendarily disturbing and outrageous, and still artistic. A sweet movie. Next, I went to the theaters and watched Challengers, the latest Luca Guadagnino movie. And boy, am I glad I did. Basically, this movie has IMAX screenings, even though it's a intimate drama between 3 human characters. And that kind of educates you on what this movie is. It's a human drama that's blown up to epic scale just by Luca's cinematography, the score, the eye that you're looking at this with. Kind of everything it was hyped up to be. I really like Guadagnino, despite almost always missing his films when they're out in theaters. I mean, I've actually seen Suspiria and now this. The rest, since Call Me By Your Name, I followed as they came out. I feel like I've almost been spoiled on most of them. Is that weird? Like, I know things about the films, and they are all up my alley, but I never actually watch a lot of them. I guess that is weird. Kind of feels like really bad luck, but I'm fixing that. I'm working on it. I'm becoming a better person. Anyway, Challengers is a cinema, kind of cinema. What I mean when I say that is, this doesn't pull you in with a sell. It's something specific and marketable. The closest thing it has to market is Zendaya, her star power, but its audience isn't supposed to be tennis enthusiasts, people who know exactly what's going to happen in this drama. It's simply a character study that has to show you what its story is and make you invested with the powers of cinematic prowess. My opinion is that it does win in wowing viewers with technical achievements in every department. I'll go over the acting, the soundtrack, the filmmaking in general. So besides being natural Adonises framed from every best angle by Guadagnino's eye, all 3 central performers give dimension as individuals, while feeding these energies into this triangle chemistry going back and forth in every direction. Mike Feist plays Art Donaldson, with physically a preppy puppy dog aura with a constant lack of assuredness about him. He's the more tight-laced one, never up to creating a conflict even as Tashi becomes a shared obsession between him and his best friend. But that dog quality I described, that dog in him, can go from simpering to hungry when his eye's on the ball. Josh O'Connor plays Patrick, the more confident, arrogant best friend of Art. He's got that smarmy smirk to him that he knows is charismatic. Otherwise, he kind of acts out a down-on-his-luck, struggling persona. Though his background is as riche as Art's, he delivers a hot temper and tension to the dynamic. And then Zendaya as Tashi. She's what I'd say is the more abstract role in the story. She's the superstar, the one most likely out of the 3 who would go on to be a famous top-billing player. And she has that savant quality to her character. She loves the game to a level where it comes in between her and other people. And so in many of the roles she's playing, she does act as the drive that performers need to move forward. But this isn't to say she isn't playing a real human being too. She's giving a performance for both layers to the movie, which I think does need mentioning, as screen-wise she isn't outplaying or outshining the other 2 leads, despite being who will draw in the wider audience. The score, by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, doesn't sound like your typical score even by these 2's standards. It opts to use club and dance beats, pulsing rhythms, even cheeky little yeah, yeah, yeah refrains at points, and it blends into the movie successfully in a way I don't think I've seen done before. Because these driving beats overlay cinematic emotional moments, like we're talking slow-mo walking away shots and characters coming to their interlocked moments of resolution, the way an ambient orchestral score would support. It's not like an ironic or tone-shifting use of rave and club. It actually fits more appropriately to the idiosyncrasies of these specific characters, who are throughout the film chasing after something. On both the romantic layer and the sports layer, conflict actually imbues them with a drive rather than a halting obstacle like in the traditional tempo and structure of a drama. There's something about it all the aesthetics, that isn't literally an 80s neon-drenched kind of vision, but a halogen-lit course of energy is running through it. The whole vague tennis aesthetic helps. You know, you have your clean blocks and balls and brands. It naturally lends itself to feeling prep, country club, sporty. Luca isn't exaggerating this either. What he exaggerates and focuses on are bodies, gazes, movements. You know, our main cast constantly highlighted as being great clean forms themselves with those removed qualities to them as well, but touched by the camera so that the allure of them is also there pulling us in. I think it was the right decision to go with the level of horniness that is this film all over. It's very horny, but keeps itself smartly in PG-13 levels sexually. There are no overt sex scenes in the movie, even when canonically there is sex happening between the characters. It fuels the film as a drive, a tantalization beyond Zendaya being the prize, the object of affection. You know, it's leading to the real goal of these people, which I think is the spark, and some might say the creation of good tennis. I do have to say a bit negatively, the actors physically change very little between 14 or so years of time, but it's just a nitpick. Because coming with that, they do all have new looks, with hair and costume, even some age acting physically to keep the year we're in at any point clear. The film has a structure where it's bouncing back and forth between all the timelines, and it does an excellent job having either costume changes or set details that immediately tell you, even when they don't use the 14 years ago type blocks of text, where you are. I didn't ever feel like lost, which is one of the impressive feats that are sort of going on behind the scenes throughout this movie. Like the ball boys preserving the flow of the game, Luca Guadagnino is not afraid to use actors for their physical appeal. He's a real Italian filmmaker. Why not shoot people like the eternal statues of beauty that they can represent, huh? You should understand who a character is by what weird-looking person you cast to be that character. Capiche? Even in his films that aren't in Italy, there is still that distinct Italian approach to filmmaking with Luca, which I love to see. To close out my thoughts, you know, it's hard to even confirm that it's real love that's felt by these three. They are people with their passions split, and true love may not even be a factor to them. I still have a main drawback, which goes back to the premise. This particular story and set of characters wouldn't jump out to me in any special personal way, but again, because of everything put into this. I mean, I love this movie about as much as I could love this story. That ending will really turn everything around and reward this long build-up that all these characters share. Story of raging egos and struggling pretty boys. Tennis. There's a potential little Easter egg I want to point out. I've never seen anybody mention that Tashi's own surname is Duncan, and there's a scene early on where Patrick first arrives at the Challenger and hungrily eyes some Dunkin' the donuts, and that's why it's a 10 out of 10. Sometimes we just want to watch movie stars show us how much better than us they are. Okay, and then I watched Casting Blossoms to the Sky. But that forms a trilogy with 2 other films that I completed, so for now I'm going to talk about Guarding Tess, because I watched it in between for some reason. Guarding Tess, a Hugh Wilson film, is a Nicolas Cage movie. As a Nick Cage movie, I decided pretty decisively by the end that without him this would be so boring and cloying. I mean, it still has plenty of dull sappiness to it, but it really is the Cage who injects his weird battering ram persona into it, which makes it so much more balanced. And I can give credit to Shirley MacLaine too. It is a 2-person dance going on, and she manages to find the chemistry between what should be the hoity-toityest character of all and that specimen of a man. But her character, if she was alone, would fall into being an eye-rolling claim of sympathy for old ruling-class octogenarians and middle-class rubes a lot quicker. It's an easily digestible family film, and it serves its function, okay? It does rub me the wrong way. The unquestioning adoration of political figures and waste of taxpayer money. This movie feels like it would retweet this. Objectively, there's plenty to find of how terrible this entire situation is, how awful these people are as parasites of the American people. But, you know, before it gets too far into that, look at the funny, cranky granny who's actually sad and lonely in her privately guarded mansion and limo rides. How humorous to be caught in between political theater. Also, I would like to mention that Cage goes full Bat Lieutenant at one point to get information out of a suspect. And worse, he's leading the charge in the very next scene where they're infiltrating the location given. Like, no bitch, he's in the tank at that point, not getting VIP treatment. But whatever, it's a movie, it's the movies. You need him to be the one that saves her personally and gets that personal acknowledgement and you know. Did I really give this a 6? Overall, it's a fine film. It's humorous, it's cozy, it isn't constructed too lazily or anything. It runs on shallow charm, and it's got just enough to stay afloat. Whew. Alright. So pretty much closing out the month, because, I mean, these are 3 amazing films that sort of can be grouped together, and I was just fine taking the rest of the month to sit on them, plan out whatever I want to watch next. Really revisit, think about these amazing films by Nobuhiko Obayashi, the man you may know from his psychedelic Japanese horror freakout House, which is an all-time favorite of mine. But this is an anti-war trilogy, and as silly as it gets pretty damn heavy as well. The one word I would use to describe Casting Blossoms Into the Sky, our first movie in the list, and all of them really, is sentimental. This is an old filmmaker, well past self-consciousness, putting out purely sentimental, hopeful, emotional, informational statements, songs of life. There's a lot of looking back on his life and what he can do for the future that's coming up after him. Casting Blossoms is the one that's part documentary. It's all of these fragmented pieces of fiction and history and real life coming together, and with his gumbo style where all kinds of flourishes and jumps to separate images to convey meanings conveyed in other scenes happen, it really all comes together the more that the picture progresses. This really worked as a big picture. It is so unique in the way he uses green screen and special effects. It's inspiring. To any artist, I feel like it inspires you with the approach of just do it. If you have a vision and an emotional core that you're sticking to, artifice means nothing. It becomes part of the language if you use it so. He manages to pull off the emotional core and meaning behind all the cheap, zany effects. And that's even odder knowing that parts of this get real brutal. The wartime stories told, as from the mouth of survivors, are not holding much back. Like, I feel less daunted to finally watch Grave of the Fireflies after this because I know it's about the very same kind of horrific events. Probably still cry though. This film is an acknowledgement of the horrors of war and the involvement of both sides and all people of the countries involved. I do think it's asking us to look at our involvement as a people when our countries go to war. There's a sympathetic focus on women. The main character here is a woman journalist who hears about this fireworks festival and thus goes to the town it's happening in, where she runs across her old lover that she left after a mysterious linking to, I don't know, something about war looming over, not being willing to accept happiness. She also links up with another female journalist. They talk about their lives, difficulties in love, and as these stories of war come to be told, a lot of it is from the perspective of women and families, those who are often the greatest victims of cruelty and atrocities. I found his over-emphatic, hyper style to be disarming, which is a good word for an anti-war film. It really is asking you to disarm. There's no presumption of this being a unique story. It jumps at showing how ordinary and repetitive these stories are. It is a shared drama, a common epic. Just take the universally appealing nature of fireworks as a continued motif. They're presented as the bombs of good, as opposed to the bombs of war. Fireworks are attached to happy memories, likely childhood fantasies in anyone who grew up going to at least one fireworks show, which I feel like is most people. Especially with the cultural significance of fireworks in both Japan and America, which are the two countries whose conflict is the focus here, particularly. And they're so sentimental. The main characters are pretty much ciphers, practically templates. They're lacking depth or deeper interiors to discover. It doesn't harm the film the way it would in a traditional one. It doesn't ask that of them. Although I don't let it off the hook completely for that, because they are still very basic. But with the scope of the story, they are serving as like guides in a museum would, to give you a human protagonist who will ask questions and find all the bits for this expose. There's one recurring image that makes me laugh. There's these shots where you have this girl straight-faced just unicycling away from people. And this is another significant motif of the film, is these children on unicycles. And the way that they all unicycle just looks very comedic. It's like he specifically instructed anybody on a unicycle to, like unicycle, I don't know how the fuck you unicycle normally, but they're like so rigid, just their legs are moving as they unicycle away from people. It's funny. It's a charming image. And on the other side, we do have considerable restraint in how horrific and violent events are shown. Within the extreme tear-jerking and misanthropy of the horrors of war, it is tempting to wallow in it and go in a further, more overt, spiteful direction. For one, I think it's a matter of respect to victims, not to show the cruelest of sufferings they went through. For another, the goal of Obayashi's anti-war trilogy is to put down our weapons and move constructively towards peace. Uninhibited portrayals of atrocities inflicted upon a people has its own way to be cathartic, but it can very, very easily be more effective in riling us up, getting its viewers to see the past as an affront that cannot stand. It's an effective way to make propaganda if you're pro-war. But Obayashi also brings up the Japanese people's own involvement in the war, and does mention the horrific war crimes that they are known for, like comfort women. The firework festival, as it exists today, is filmed at the end through a joint project with the town that it commemorates and Pearl Harbor. Fireworks as an explosive symbol of hope, remembrance, and forgiveness is the pivotal symbol of the film, and a beautiful expression to make such a statement on. But yeah, what I was taking away from this is kind of like Hausu, which the more you watch it, the more you realize it does have legitimately horrific context, is that Obayashi just seems like he wants to make you grin and smile even throughout the hardships of life. This film is both playful and a serious look at the horrors of war. The fact that he can combine these two things really needs to be commended. I mean, there were points of this where I was tearing up, and there was just as many points where I'm giddily chuckling, smiling, or feeling hopeful. It's the kind of assembly that breaks down your defenses so that you can have a heart-to-heart with history and humanity. Beautiful stuff, beautiful stuff. So what was the second film in this trilogy? 7 Weeks. 7 Weeks is the sweeping family drama. This time we get a character-driven epic with protagonists with layers to uncover. This one can be viewed as a more conventional fiction, but it feels like it's based on what could be a true story. So you still have that intrusion of non-fiction, but a lot of what makes it feel so real is fictional sets with actors just playing roles. So this is just showcasing a whole other strength for Mr. Obayashi. When you watch this film, it feels like you're experiencing a family function, where you meet up with all your relatives, close and distant, you hear what's going on, you might catch up, maybe learn some things about these people, and recollect the history connecting you all. But with Obayashi, it's amplified. You're getting it condensed and colorful and, his style. This is the most personally affecting family ceremony you've ever experienced. You really hear the walls come down and speak with unprecedented candor about the memories that have crisscrossed your lives and slowly revealed the core events that have shaped your ancestors, elders, and siblings. The green screen here. I have to say, I would compare certain shots here to Neil Breen films, but somehow it works. I mean, what is going on? What are you doing, Obayashi? It's so candid and emotional. It convinces you that, okay, this is fine. Why can't you make your film this way? I mean, I just want to feel things, and you're making me feel things, Obayashi. This film also has a lot of artificial zooms and pans, I noticed. Like, many shots were filmed as wides with everyone inside, but then in post you start zoomed in, and when it moves and people move, it kinda aligns motions like in post. There's a bit of a nauseating quality to it. Like, this would be unacceptable in most films. And I'll say it doesn't exactly resonate every time. Maybe sometimes you can refrain from feeling that jerked around. But if I may try to justify it, the chaos of family interactions dominates the rhythm. Everyone is constantly speaking right after the other and rapidly. This must be on the page one of the longest scripts ever in film history. But of course, Obayashi, the schizophrenic editor, channels this into a touching recreation of how some family dynamics might feel to the overcome young adult caught in the middle of ensemble conversations between this member and that member, and that in a family reunion. While we're starting to rank these, I would put Casting Blossoms above 7 Weeks. 7 Weeks has certain characters who remain undeveloped, and it sags a bit in the midsection as family exposition is laid out faster than we can care. But through it all, it prevents very strong cinematic images amidst its whirlwind, and the beginning and ending portions are fully arresting. It's another tearjerker. It's much briefer in directly touching the traumas of war. You know it's there, but you have to wait for it. The grandfather character who lived through the war has to eventually reveal his story. And even then, it's like a glimpse. But you see how these experiences reverberate through a family and affect everything that we've seen before and since. And again, bringing a focus to women, that pattern becomes stronger here. It's now for a second time we have women playing the more predominant roles. It's like Japan's evolution can be very closely monitored by its conditions in terms of its women. And here we see generations of free, curious, empathetic women who are the future, in contrast to pre-war and wartime difficulties, limitations largely thrust onto them. I'm also going to say that in terms of soundtrack, this, Casting Blossoms, and as you'll see, Hanagatami, they all have constant music playing. They all have like constant orchestral, classical, piano music, which also just lends to the emotional loudness, directness of it. Because when, if you got a movie and every scene's underlaid with those heartstrings, that could easily become cheesy, but as I am desperately trying to convey to you, Obayashi has gone beyond the realm of cheesy. It's the anti-war trilogy. This shit is sentimental to the max. It's mostly comprised of classical emotional music that underscores every scene. But yeah, this is a conversation that needs to be had. It's like as important as family. And if I may, Hausu was a part of my introduction to cinema. And if you were to draw for me a line connecting that from like 10 years ago to this, it would be unthinkable. And that difference of time is me as a kid to me as an adult, starting to absorb more and more of this looking down at youth as much as looking up at adults. Yeah. Just telling this story as if it was conveying that this drama, all of this emotion, is being captured through one family who isn't special, isn't one of a kind, just people like you and me. Hanagatami. In closing out the trilogy, I was really wondering what I was in for, hearing that this is sort of the cherry on top, the favorite of many people who've seen this trilogy. And god damn it, this is the one that even beats out Hausu and truly brings all the films of his I've seen together and feels like his capstone statement in a film he made to represent himself as a man and a director. I'm gonna go into a modern masterpiece, Hanagatami by Nobuhiko Obayashi. This film is to truly capture a memory of youth. Each character in this one is a potent ingredient, harmonizing in and out with each other one. Being an adaptation of a novel, the film immerses us in Obayashi's staged environment. The hot lights, the shocks of poetically framed images, the sets, the combination of real set and green screen set. We're through the looking glass here, again entering that Hausu level artifice. This is also a dream work. Obayashi apparently always wanted to adapt this story, and if we know anything, he uninhibitedly lays his sentimentality bare. It is no less so here. I mean, again, honestly, it's hard to rate the film, especially after one viewing. It's almost like an orchestral piece as a whole, not just because, again, the score with its orchestral classical pieces is basically constant and intermingling with the story we're watching, but even the rhythms of it, the visuals, the character dynamics in it. It does feel like they are all as parts of an orchestra building this one piece out into the world. So much of Japan and myriad global influences are being shaped into this masterwork. In a weird way, it felt like bringing me back to my childhood, where Japan first became a fascination for me. It captured those unexplainable, exotic, but intuitively felt elements that birth that kind of country philia that some people have. That's just my commentary as an American, but there is a kind of string connecting the two nations amidst each installment of this trilogy, born of war but containing humans with interests outside the borders of it. It has green screen that's literally visible at the seams at points. Many of the emotional climaxes or takeaways remain open to interpretation, but it's like watching this flaws become an irrelevant term. The story is happening and the story's the story. Again, somehow, after each one, it feels like he is holding less back than the one before. It's a work of art. It's like falling under the spell of a classical piece. It's a fast-paced epic, and it's a film. There's something about his rapid cutting, cinematic style. As much as we fill in the blanks at 24 frames per second of movies, I don't know, it's like there are connections being made, where we're automatically filling in the blanks a lot. I think it invites us to feel like we're using our imagination while watching it. But as childlike as Obayashi's lens is, Hanagatami especially is emotionally complex. There are many scenes where the combination of what's happening with the experimental portrayal of it and the music convey layers of conflicting and parallel and perpendicular feelings. Which is to say, if you show this to an average moviegoer, it'll probably feel like nonsense. But you have to give in to Obayashi's style because when you do, it actually works. His frenetic overload of style doesn't care about tricking the viewer into believing the reality of events, but it cares a lot about visually striking images and the emotion behind every moment. The protagonist of the story is this overly boyish, wide-eyed young man. Can't help but feel like a surrogate for Obayashi. The way he stands out as this oddball who goes along with everything, like his childlike wonder is still fully intact, feels very much like the way Obayashi attacks his stories as a director. But he belongs in a world that is troubled. The buzz in the air as these townsfolk are being ramped up into an oncoming war is palpable. There's this great festival scene that's used to capture the magical nature of such large glowing nights, but it doesn't stop the looming dread of what's coming to all the people from this war. Besides being a look at young characters trying to survive this particular epoch, it's a universal story of soul-seeking and finding oneself. Our cast explore ideas of masculinity, of romance, of good and evil from within their social constructs and from within themselves. Throughout the trilogy, poetry and writing have been eulogized as an art form. With Hanagatami being an adaptation, the artifice and amalgamative nature of Obayashi's cinematography feels like it's deconstructing the immersive feeling of traditional live-action cinema to make something akin to the imaginative, abstract landscape created in the mind, conversing with the written word. Knowing that this was supposed to be Obayashi's last film, that he was diagnosed with cancer before he set out to make it, there is a very bold thing done at the close of the movie. It's again like Obayashi is going above and beyond the limits of cinema to reach the viewer and make us talk as if in person about our lives, tell us what he wants to say to us, and help us to think about what we have to do to make a happier life. Yeah, this is beautiful, haunting, sad, and humorous. Just everything, the whole life experience wrapped up in art. Fully Obayashi. Obayashi already had a VIP director's card for Houseu alone, with this trilogy of films that are all great works, that all offer something completely different and display mastery over a span of film styles. I don't see a reason not to consider him one of my favorite directors now. Also, turns out he has a huge-ass filmography full of classics, according to fans. It was Houseu that brought one of his works to public attention, and then all the rest of his films have still been really hard to find or watch. Hopefully, with his last 4 films recently getting distributed, his legacy opens up. I'll be diving into the rest of his big ones for sure, whenever I can. This is a significant find over here. I really urge fans of cinema and Japanese cinema to go out and watch these. It's a significant package that offers a significant experience. Let it be a shining light on the long road ahead.